Every town has its traditions. Some are harmless. Some are comforting, like a warm blanket on a cold night. But some are warnings in disguise. Hollow Creek, a small town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, had a Halloween tradition that everyone cherished, the annual Pumpkin Festival. Each October, families would gather in the town square, which was usually quiet and unassuming, and transform it into a sprawling carnival of autumn colors. Stalls lined the streets, overflowing with candy, caramel apples, and spiced cider. Children dashed between hay bales, wearing costumes stitched together with care or borrowed from older siblings. The air was thick with the scent of roasted pumpkin seeds, cinnamon, and fallen leaves. But in the year 2019, the festival had a different air. Something unnameable had crept into Hollow Creek, something subtle yet suffocating, like fog creeping into a valley. So soft that most didn't notice it until it was too late. I arrived at the square just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Orange light bathed the streets, but it felt off. Shadows stretched longer than they should have, twisting and curling as if they had a life of their own. Children laughed, but the laughter seemed hollow, echoing in a way that made my chest tighten. The pumpkins were the first thing that caught my attention. Usually, they were festive, jovial, and quirky smiling faces, goofy expressions, or ghosts carved clumsily into their orange flesh. But tonight, they were different. One pumpkin sitting atop a rickety wooden cart near the fountain drew me in immediately. It was small, round, almost unassuming, but the face carved into it was disturbingly lifelike. Its eyes, hollow and dark, seemed to follow me as I walked past. The grin was jagged, cruel in a way that no human hand should have been able to craft. I leaned closer, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't explain why, but a cold knot twisted in my stomach. "Hey, look at this one!" A child shouted nearby, pointing to a pumpkin shaped like a cartoon witch. Their parents laughed, unaware of the eerie silence that seemed to cling to the lifelike pumpkin. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The festival went on. People ate, drank, and admired the craftsmanship of the pumpkins, while I wandered, drawn again and again to that single small pumpkin with its hollow eyes. Its presence seemed to hum with an energy I couldn't name. That night, I left the square and returned to my home at the edge of town. The wind had picked up rustling dry leaves across the cobblestone streets. The full moon hung low, casting pale light over everything. And for the first time, I noticed the shadows outside my window moving in strange, angular ways. Then the news broke. Old Mrs. Halloway, the town's historian and caretaker of Hollow Creek's archives, had been found dead in her home. Everyone was in shock. She had been perfectly healthy that morning, greeting visitors at the library, her hands still dusted with old pages. By evening, she was gone. No signs of struggle, no explanation, just death. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, but I couldn't, because I remembered her pumpkin. She had entered the festival competition, and her pumpkin, her only entry, sat on display that evening. And now, as I replayed the memory in my mind, I realized something impossible. Her pumpkin had predicted her death. The hollow eyes, the jagged grin, the way the pumpkin seemed to be screaming silently, warning anyone who dared to look. I shivered, drawing the blanket tighter around me as I stared out the window at the street below, now empty and silent by morning. A strange unease had settled over Hollow Creek. Whispers traveled from house to house. Did anyone see her pumpkin? It looked like her. Some tried to laugh it off. Some, like me, didn't speak at all, staring at their own pumpkins, half wondering what horrors they might hold. The festival continued, but the joy had gone. Children played quietly, glancing nervously at every carved gourd, while adults spoke in hushed tones about fate, coincidence, and curses. But none of us wanted to say it aloud. The pumpkins were speaking. They were telling a story, and that story was only beginning. Later that week, another resident, Mr. Whitaker, the baker, was found dead. His pumpkin had been on display at the festival, carved with a faint outline of a knife and a loaf of bread. The image was subtle, almost artistic, but the message was clear. The pumpkin had predicted exactly how he would die. Panic began to ripple through the town. Families huddled in their homes. Shopkeepers locked their doors. No one carved pumpkins after dark, and yet, every morning new pumpkins appeared, perfectly carved, disturbing, lifelike, and each one foretold a death. I remember standing in the empty square one morning, staring at the newest pumpkin, trembling as I traced the lines of its jagged mouth with my eyes. I felt a cold, creeping certainty that someone or something was orchestrating this, that every pumpkin was part of a pattern, and that pattern was moving toward me. Something had arrived in Hollow Creek that year, something ancient, cunning, and merciless, and it had chosen our town, and chosen us. To watch its story unfold, sleep didn't come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her pumpkin, the hollow eyes, the jagged grin, the silent warning. I couldn't shake the image, couldn't silence the voice in my head whispering, "This is just the beginning." By morning, the town square was eerily quiet. The festival had ended, leaving behind only scattered hay, forgotten candy wrappers, and the lingering scent of roasted pumpkin seeds. But the shadows remained, stretching unnaturally across the cobblestones. And so did the pumpkins. One in particular caught my eye. It wasn't large, but it radiated an almost magnetic unease. The face carved into it was grotesque, yet familiar in a way I couldn't place. Its hollow eyes glinted in the early morning light. And at its base, carved into the flesh with sharp precision, was a date. 2 days from now. I felt my chest tighten. I showed the pumpkin to Daniel, my childhood friend and the only person I trusted to speak honestly about things others might dismiss as superstition. Masam. That date, Daniel said slowly, examining the pumpkin as if it were a crime scene. It's a countdown. It's marking the day someone dies. I wanted to scoff. I wanted to tell him it was coincidence, chance, superstition. But the memory of Mrs. Halloway nodded me. The pumpkin had predicted her death, hadn't it? We debated what to do. Should we warn the town? Should we destroy the pumpkin? Every logical thought collided with the creeping terror in my gut. Daniel's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. We have to watch. Document it. Don't touch it. Don't move it. Just watch. So we did. For the next 2 days, we kept a careful vigil. Every hour, every movement in the square was logged. The pumpkin sat silently, staring at us with its hollow eyes. And with every passing moment, its grin seemed to widen, as if it knew we were watching, as if it were feeding on our fear. The night before the date, I couldn't sleep again. Shadows outside my window moved with a life of their own. A sudden chill made me shiver, and I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Something in the air had changed. The wind outside whispered in tones I couldn't understand, and every so often, I thought I heard the faint scrape of a knife against pumpkin flesh, though no one was there. The next morning, Tino and I went to the town square early. The streets were deserted. Even the birds seemed absent, as if the entire world had held its breath. And then, we saw her, Margaret Whitmore, a kindly woman in her 60s who lived alone on the edge of town. Her pumpkin had been carved with a grotesque figure, hands reaching, eyes hollow, a staircase descending into darkness. We had noticed it the day before, but thought perhaps it was artistic exaggeration. Now, she was gone. No one saw her leave her house. No car, no footsteps, no sign of struggle. Just gone. The pumpkin remained, perched like a sentinel, as if watching her vanish. And in that moment, a cold realization struck me. The pumpkin didn't just predict death, it orchestrated it. It marked the exact moment, the exact way. We ran to her house, pounding on the door. But it was empty. Her bed untouched, her tea still warm on the table. And yet, the air inside smelled faintly of decaying, unnatural, metallic tang that made my stomach twist. Daniel turned to me, pale and trembling. It's real. It's real, Masam. The pumpkins. They're not just warnings. They're instructions. They're killing people. We spent the rest of the day trying to warn others, but the town was already in a state of panic. People whispered about curses, omens, and supernatural forces, though most refused to openly acknowledge it. No one wanted to confront what everyone feared by nightfall. The square filled again not with laughter, but with silent, watchful figures. And then we saw it, another pumpkin, freshly carved, sitting in the middle of the cobblestones. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth twisted into a scream. At its base, another date, tomorrow and this one, was for someone we both knew. I remember staring at it in horror. The date carved at its base glowed faintly in the moonlight, as if alive. I could feel the weight of inevitability pressing down on my chest. Daniel grabbed my arm. We can't stop it, but maybe we can survive it. Maybe if we understand the pattern. But deep down, I knew there was no escaping. The pumpkins didn't just mark death. They demanded attention, fear, and, ultimately, compliance. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking of hollow eyes and jagged grins. I thought of Mrs. Halloway, Margaret Whitmore, and everyone else who had vanished or died. And I wondered, who would be next? As the moon rose high, casting silver light over Hollow Creek, I realized the terrifying truth. The town wasn't just cursed. We were being watched, and the pumpkins were the eyes. Asterisk, asterisk, by the third night, the fear in Hollow Creek had transformed into something heavier. It wasn't just panic anymore, it was a suffocating dread, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every shadow seem alive. Windows were shuttered, doors bolted, and streets emptied. No one dared carve a pumpkin, but new ones still appeared. Perfectly shaped, perfectly menacing, each one a silent announcement of fate. Daniel and I couldn't stay away. We had to understand. We had to see who or what was behind this, so we returned to the square just as the moon began to rise. Its silver light glinting off frost-kissed leaves. The air was unnaturally still. Not a leaf stirred. Not a single creature moved. Only the pumpkins, and the quiet, suffocating sense of being watched. We hid behind a broken fountain, crouched low in the shadows, and waited. Hours passed. My knees ached, my heart pounded, and every creak of the wooden stalls made me flinch. Then I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, a ripple in the corner of my vision. But then, there he was. Or it. A figure stepped lightly among the pumpkins. Its movements were unnaturally smooth, almost gliding, as if it floated above the ground. The light of the moon revealed pale, elongated fingers, each one glowing faintly orange as they hovered above a pumpkin. And then I saw it, the carving. With swift, precise movements, the figure shaped the pumpkin's flesh without a knife, without tools, as though the pumpkin itself obeyed some unseen will. I swallowed hard. Daniel's hand trembled on my shoulder. "Is it human?" he whispered. I shook my head. I didn't know. The figure's body was slender, almost fragile, yet it moved with an impossible grace. The head turned slowly in our direction, and I felt it before I saw it. A presence, a gaze that penetrated everything. hollow, blank, but suffocating in its intensity. I tried to step back. Daniel grabbed my arm, whispering, "Stay. We have to see this. We have to understand." We watched as the figure completed its work. A new pumpkin emerged, grotesque and lifelike. The eyes seemed to pulse, the mouth twisted in a scream, frozen forever. And carved into its base was a name. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Someone's next," he said, his voice trembling. The figure paused. It raised its head slightly, tilting toward us. And in that moment, I felt something impossible ripple in my mind. A whisper in the air that wasn't there. A warning, you shouldn't be watching. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't look away. And then, almost casually, it began to move toward us. We ran. Branches clawed at our faces, roots tripped us, and the cold air burned our lungs. Behind us, a low, hollow laughter echoed deep, resonant, inhuman. It followed us all the way to the edge of the woods, then abruptly stopped, as if the figure had vanished into thin air. We collapsed near an abandoned barn, gasping and trembling. Daniel's eyes were wide with terror. "It's not human," he said. "Nothing human could carve pumpkins like that, or move like that, or watch like that." I nodded, too afraid to speak. The realization sank in slowly, like ice filling my chest. This was not a person. This was something older, something patient. Something that had been waiting in Hollow Creek for a long time. The next morning, new pumpkins appeared. One was sitting near the square fountain, glowing faintly in the dawn light. Its face was twisted into a scream. Its base bore another name, another date. And as I stared, I felt the invisible gaze again, as if the figure from the night before was watching through the eyes of the pumpkin itself. We knew then that the creature, the carver, didn't just predict death, it dictated it. Each pumpkin was a contract, a notice of impending doom. And the town had already signed without knowing it. Daniel and I made a pact. We would find it, we would follow it, uncover its secrets, and try to stop it. We had no plan, no weapons, no certainty that it could be stopped. But we had to try, because by now I realized a horrifying truth. The carver didn't just create pumpkins. It was shaping fate itself. And one day, that fate would come for me. That night, I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling, counting the shadows creeping along the walls. Every rustle outside, every sigh of the wind made me flinch. I thought I heard the faint scrape of a knife was it the carving of a pumpkin being shaped by ghostly hands? The fear was no longer external. It had invaded my mind, wrapping around my thoughts, my dreams, my very being. Hollow Creek wasn't just cursed. It was alive, and it was hungry, and we were standing directly in its path. Asterisk, asterisk, by the time the fourth night came, Hollow Creek had transformed from a quiet town into a place gripped by paranoia. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with unease. People moved quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact. Children no longer laughed. Their costumes hung limp, their eyes darting to every shadow. The festival square, once a place of joy and warmth, was now a graveyard of carved pumpkins, each glowing faintly in the moonlight. Each waiting Danielle and I patrolled the square that night, trying to track patterns, looking for any clue about the figure we had seen. But the more we observed, the more we realized something terrifying. The pumpkins were not random. Every carving predicted death, and the deaths were happening exactly as the pumpkins had shown. It started subtly. At first, just one or two townspeople disappeared or died in ways eerily similar to the pumpkin depictions. Then, as days passed, more and more people vanished. Some were found collapsed in their homes, eyes wide with terror, expressions frozen in silent screams. Others simply disappeared, leaving doors locked and windows untouched, as if they had evaporated from existence. Daniel was obsessed with documenting everything. He mapped every pumpkin, every carving, every death, creating an intricate web of horror. But even as we charted it, the pattern became clearer and more horrifying. It wasn't just deaths, it was the way they died. The exact sequence of events that the pumpkin had shown. One evening, we tried to destroy one of the pumpkins. It was daring and desperate, a small pumpkin carved with the image of a man tripping on the stairs. Daniel struck a match, set the pumpkin ablaze, and we watched as flames consumed it. The pumpkin shrieked, tore at least. It sounded like it shrieked a high pitch. Hollow, otherworldly sound that made my ears ring. We expected relief. We expected the curse to be broken. We were wrong. The next morning, the man depicted in the pumpkin fell down his stairs, exactly as the carving had shown. He died instantly. The pumpkin had been destroyed, but the outcome was unavoidable. That night, the square seemed alive. Shadows stretched impossibly long, twisting like serpents. And more pumpkins had appeared. Larger, more grotesque, some sitting on the ground, some hovering slightly above it, their hollow eyes glowing ominously. Hollow Creek had become a town under siege by fear. Families barricaded themselves inside, doors locked, lights off. Storekeepers refused to open their shops. And yet, despite everyone's attempts to hide, the pumpkins came. Always. Neil whispered. There, feeding on us. The more we fear, the stronger it gets. I didn't want to believe him. But every night, the pumpkin's presence pressed closer, their hollow eyes following me even when I wasn't looking at them. I felt watched, always. And the thought that the next pumpkin could be for me made sleep impossible. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was anticipation. Every time a new pumpkin appeared, the town held its breath, silently hoping the name carved on it wasn't theirs. Children cried quietly in their rooms. Parents whispered prayers in corners. And Daniel and I, helpless observers, knew that the next name could be anyone. One night, a scream echoed from the other side of town. We ran toward it, hearts pounding. A pumpkin sat on a porch, large and grotesque, its face twisted in a scream so lifelike it seemed to move. On its base, the name was clear. A young boy, no more than 10 years old. Daniel froze. We have to stop it, he said, voice trembling. I shook my head. Stop it, Daniel. Nothing stops it. It's alive. And it's patient. And it knows we're afraid. We watched from the shadows as the family discovered the pumpkin. The boy screamed, his small hands pressed against the carved eyes, trying to push the pumpkin away. But it didn't move. It sat there, silent, observing, waiting. By morning, the boy had vanished. His parents were found huddled in the corner of their home, whispering incoherently about eyes that followed them, about a grin that was alive. The pumpkin remained on the porch, unchanged. Hollow Creek had learned a brutal truth. Fear was no protection. Hiding was no protection. Even destroying a pumpkin didn't help. These were not mere objects. They were warnings, punishments, and instruments of foretold rolled into one. Daniel and I realized something else too, something even more terrifying. The pumpkins were everywhere. In homes, on porches, in the square. Some appeared overnight. Some seemed to appear in moments of distraction. And we noticed that the closer we got to understanding them, the more aggressive they became. Something was teaching us a lesson. Something was showing us that in Hollow Creek, no one was safe. And for the first time, I understood the true horror of the pumpkins. They weren't just predicting death. They were shaping it. And the town, the entire town, was powerless to resist. Asterisk. By now, Hollow Creek wasn't just frightened, was paralyzed. Every home was shuttered, every street empty. The festival that once brought joy had become a memory drenched in terror. The pumpkins sat everywhere, silent witnesses to our fear, glowing faintly in the darkness, as if mocking us. Daniel and I moved cautiously through the town, documenting every pumpkin we could find. Each one seemed to hum with life, an energy that twisted the air around it, bending shadows and warping the wind. And with each carving, each hollow eye and jagged grin, the fear grew not just in the town, but in us. It wasn't just the deaths anymore. It was the way the pumpkins predicted them. We had begun to notice a pattern, subtle details embedded in the carvings, a sequence of events that led inevitably to the person's end. A staircase, a knife, a shadow. Some were abstract. Some were horrifyingly literal, but all of them came true. People whispered about the curse, or about the town's sins, or the long-forgotten legends buried in Hollow Creek's history. One story we heard repeatedly was of a witch, executed centuries ago on the outskirts of the town, who vowed that her eyes would watch the town for generations. Some swore the pumpkins were her doing, her way of punishing the living for the crimes of the dead. But Daniel and I didn't have time for legends. Every day brought new names, new dates, new horrors. And then the unthinkable happened. We found the first pumpkin carved with my own face. It was tucked into a corner of the town square, lit by a faint orange glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The eyes were hollow, yet sharp, and the jagged mouth twisted into a scream that seemed alive. The base bore a date just a few nights away. I froze. Daniel grabbed my shoulder, eyes wide. "It's you," he whispered. "Masom, it's you." I wanted to run. I wanted to destroy the pumpkin. But deep down, I knew neither action would matter. This wasn't just a warning, it was a prediction. And by the way the town had unfolded, a warning wasn't enough. It had to be obeyed. That night, we patrolled the streets again. The town was deathly silent. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, bending toward us as if reaching. And yet, we had no choice but to keep moving. We had to understand the curse before it consumed me completely. We revisited the festival square, noting the positions of the pumpkins. Some had faces we recognized, faces of friends, neighbors, people we'd known our entire lives. Each one was frozen in a silent scream or grimace, their hollow eyes accusing, pleading, warning. And yet, the faces seemed to move when we weren't looking directly at them. I can't understand it," Daniel muttered, voice barely audible. "It's like they're alive. Like they're aware of us." I nodded, my stomach twisting with fear. "And now it's my turn," I said quietly. "I'm the next one, and the town. They don't even know it yet. They're all waiting for the next name to appear." We spent the next 2 nights hiding in the outskirts of town, watching from the shadows. The figure we had glimpsed before the pumpkin carver moved silently through the streets. Its movements were ghost-like, gliding between pumpkins, shaping them with precision that defied explanation. Then I realized something worse. It wasn't just making pumpkins. It was tracking us. Wherever we went, new carvings appeared nearby, as if marking our every step. And the closer we got to understanding it, more aggressive the carvings became. By the 4th night, the town square looked like a graveyard. Every pumpkin we had cataloged glowed faintly in the moonlight, eyes hollow and accusing. The air hummed with energy, a low vibration that made our teeth chatter. Daniel whispered, "Masom. It's not just random. The carver. It's testing us, watching how we react. It's learning from our fear." And I realized the truth. The pumpkins didn't just predict death, they shaped it. Every carving, every hollow eye, every jagged grin was a message. Not just a warning, but a blueprint. We had no choice. The town was beyond saving, not because the people had failed, but because whatever was behind this was beyond anything human. It didn't care about our logic, our courage, or our prayers. It only needed one thing: fear. And Hollow Creek was overflowing with it. That night, as Daniel and I huddled in the shadow of a burned-out stall, I understood the terrible weight of inevitability. The pumpkin at the square, the one carved with my face, was not a threat, it was a promise. And Hollow Creek would never be the same. Asterisk, asterisk, by the sixth night, I could no longer ignore it. The pumpkin carved with my face was waiting for me in the town square, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim moonlight. The jagged grin seemed alive, twitching slightly, as if mocking me. I couldn't hide. I couldn't run. I had to face the source. Daniel and I had spent every waking hour trying to understand the curse, mapping the pumpkins, noting their carvings, and tracking their appearances. Patterns were emerging. Subtle, terrifying patterns. It wasn't just death that the pumpkins predicted, it was order. Each one appeared in a sequence, as though the carver followed a ritual we couldn't see. We decided that the only way to survive, or even understand, was to confront the carver directly. And so, under the cover of darkness, we followed the faint trail of pumpkin seeds and fallen leaves that seemed to lead away from the square. Deeper into the woods surrounding Hollow Creek, the wind was sharp and cold, rustling dead leaves and whipping through the trees. Shadows seemed to crawl along the trunks, bending unnaturally, reaching toward us. Every snap of a branch, every distant animal call, made me flinch. But Daniel was resolute. "It's here," he whispered. "We'll find it. And maybe we can stop it." Hours passed. The forest grew darker, denser, as if the trees themselves were conspiring to keep us away. Then, in a clearing illuminated by the moon, we saw him. The carver it moved silently among the pumpkins that seemed to have appeared overnight. Some were small, simple, almost innocent. Others were grotesque, lifelike, faces twisted in terror. The figure glided with unnatural grace, its fingers tracing the flesh of the pumpkins, shaping them without knives or tools. The air around them faintly glowing. It paused, and for the first time, we saw its face. Or rather, the absence of one. Blank, featureless. Yet somehow, aware, hollow, terrifying. I could feel it watching. Reading every thought, sensing every fear, Daniel whispered, "It knows we're here." And it did. The figure lifted a hand, and the nearest pumpkin twisted, reshaping itself into a horrifying version of Daniel's face. The eyes, hollow and wide, seemed to scream silently. My stomach churned. I could see Daniel's pale reflection in the pumpkin's surface. And I realized something terrifying. The carver didn't just predict death, it demanded obedience. We tried to retreat, but the forest had changed. Paths we had walked confidently before now seemed endless, looping back upon themselves. The carver moved effortlessly through the trees, always appearing at the edge of our vision, always closer than we realized. Then we heard it. A sound that chilled my blood to ice. Low, hollow laughter, deep and resonant, echoing through the trees. Not human, not natural. And it was coming from everywhere at once. I turned to Daniel. We have to fight back, somehow. He shook his head, voice trembling. There's nothing to fight, Masam. It's beyond us. It's not human. We can't stop it. We can't even outrun it. And then the pumpkins began to move. Slowly at first, then faster. Faces twisted, grins widening, eyes glowing brighter. They shifted positions as if the forest itself was alive, and the carver was their master. I realized the horrifying truth. The figure wasn't just creating pumpkins. It was controlling them. The forest, the shadows, the pumpkins, they were all extensions of the carver. And they all obeyed a single will. Fear gripped me like a vice. And then I understood this was not just about the town. This was about me. The pumpkin carved with my face glowed brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat, and I could feel it drawing me forward, compelling me. Feeding on my dread, Daniel grabbed my arm, pulling me back. We can't fight it. But maybe we can survive it, if we understand it. If we learn its rules. I nodded, though my chest heaved with terror. The carver turned toward us, gliding silently through the moonlit clearing. I could feel its presence everywhere, penetrating the forest, pressing into my mind. And in that moment, I realized we had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back. We were in its world now. And it was teaching us the true meaning of fear. The forest seemed endless that night. Every turn, every shadow, every rustling leaf reminded us we were being hunted not by a creature in the ordinary sense, but by something far older, far smarter, and infinitely more terrifying. The air itself vibrated with a low hum, a rhythm that seemed to pulse from the pumpkins themselves. Daniel and I finally stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin hidden deep in the woods. Its windows were dark, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. And yet, even from a distance, I could sense the energy radiating from it, ominous, alive and waiting. Inside, the cabin was worse than anything I could have imagined. The walls were covered with pumpkin carvings, hundreds of them, all in various stages of completion. Faces of men, women, and children stared out with hollow eyes. Grins were twisted in ways no human hand could have created. Each carving had a name, a date, a sequence, every one of them, a prediction that had come true, or would soon. In the center of the cabin, the carver worked on a pumpkin larger than any I had ever seen. Its flesh seemed almost black in the dim light, and the carving depicted a man we recognized immediately. Daniel, I froze. My chest tightened. The pumpkin's jagged mouth and hollow eyes mirrored Daniel's expression from the moment we had first spotted him in the square. Daniel. I whispered, but it was too late. The figure turned slowly. Its face or the absence of one was featureless, yet it radiated an intelligence and awareness that was suffocating. I felt its gaze pierce through me, and the room seemed to warp, the shadows twisting unnaturally around the carver and the countless pumpkins. Daniel stepped forward, trembling, his face pale. I can't. I don't understand. It's carving me. I realized then what the carver truly was: not a being that merely predicted death, but a force that enforced it. Each pumpkin was not just a warning. It was a blueprint, a map of how fate would unfold. And the carver made certain that fate could not be avoided. The large pumpkin in the center shuddered, emitting a faint, hollow scream, and Daniel screamed along with it, clutching his chest as if the image inside the pumpkin was reaching through reality itself. I ran to him, grabbing his arms. Daniel, fight it. Don't let it do this. But the carver did not move. It didn't need to. The pumpkins themselves obeyed it. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in, and the shadows reached out, grasping at Daniel, pinning him to the floor. I realized, in that moment, that the carver didn't just predict death, it shaped it. Every detail, every sequence, every terrifying moment carved into the pumpkins became inevitable. The hands on the pumpkin weren't just wood and flesh, they were extensions of the carver's will, and they could reach across reality. I had to think fast. There was no conventional weapon against this, no plan that would work. All I could do was act and hope the carver's rules allowed for it. I grabbed one of the smaller pumpkins from the cabin floor, a simple one, and smashed it to the ground. The hollow scream echoed through the forest, but the carver didn't flinch. And yet, I noticed something. One of the shadowy tendrils that had been reaching for Daniel recoiled slightly. Masom, it's sensitive to its creations being disrupted. Daniel gasped, clutching his chest. It has to follow its own rules. I realized then that the carver was powerful but bound. It could enforce fate through the pumpkins, but only in specific ways. And if we could understand those rules, we might stand a chance. The large pumpkin depicting Daniel quivered violently. I grabbed it with both hands and hurled it toward the cabin door. It exploded into pieces, the hollow scream dissipating like wind through trees. Daniel collapsed, gasping for breath. The carver recoiled, but only briefly. Then it moved silently toward the remaining pumpkins, as if reshaping them, replacing what had been destroyed. I understood this was only the beginning. We had survived barely, but the truth was undeniable. The carver wasn't human. It wasn't alive in the way we understood life. But it was bound by logic, by rules that could be exploited, and if we were going to survive Hollow Creek, we had to learn those rules before it was too late. Asterisk, asterisk, by the 8th night, Hollow Creek had become a town frozen in fear. Streets were deserted, shops shuttered, and every home barricaded. Families huddled inside, whispering prayers to gods they hadn't believed in before, hoping for protection from the relentless curse. The pumpkins had multiplied. Everywhere we looked, they were there. On doorsteps, in windows, on the steps of the town hall. Faces stared at us with hollow eyes, grins twisted in frozen screams. Some depicted people already dead. Some showed those still living, including Daniel and me. Each one pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. As if alive, we had learned something crucial in the past nights. The pumpkins obeyed rules, albeit strange, ancient ones. They could not lie about fate. They could only enforce what was carved. And most importantly, they responded to fear. I realized that the entire town's terror was fueling the curse. Every scream, every shiver, every whispered prayer only strengthened the carver's power. The pumpkins had become conduits, feeding off our dread. Growing more aggressive with each passing moment, Daniel and I decided we had to act. We gathered what we could: lanterns, crowbars, even old ritual books we had found in Mrs. Halloway's library. We had no plan for fighting the carver directly. We didn't even know if that was possible. But we hoped to disrupt the pattern as the sun dipped below the horizon. The town square filled with shadows. The pumpkins glowed brighter, their hollow eyes turning toward us as we stepped onto the cobblestones. The carver appeared, gliding among them, shaping new pumpkins at an impossible speed. Its featureless face turned toward us, and I felt that same piercing gaze, as though it could see into the very marrow of my bones. We moved cautiously, trying to avoid triggering the pumpkins. But one of them, a small one carved with a face we recognized, pulsed violently and shattered into pieces on the cobblestones. A scream echoed from inside the square, not from a person, but from the pumpkin itself, a hollow, resonant sound that made my ears ring. The carver paused, its head tilted toward us, and I understood, knew we were trying to interfere. Then chaos erupted. Pumpkins began shifting positions on their own. Faces twisted, mouths opening to silent screams that seemed to reverberate through our minds. Shadows stretched from the cobblestones, coiling around lampposts, fences, and even us. The carver moved gracefully, orchestrating the madness, each movement deliberate, precise. Daniel grabbed my arm. Masum, it's learning. Every time we interfere, it adapts. We have to think smarter, not just act. I nodded, heart hammering. I remembered the rules we had noticed. The carver could enforce fate, but only according to its carvings. Destroying a pumpkin would delay the outcome, but it couldn't change the sequence entirely. And yet, if we could disrupt the pattern long enough, we might create an opening. We ran, darting between glowing pumpkins. Each one seemed alive, eyes following us, grins widening, twisting impossibly. We smashed a few with crowbars, creating explosions of hollow screams. The carver glided behind us, silent, unrelenting. reshaping destroyed pumpkins as we moved. Suddenly, a pumpkin carved with my own face hovered in midair, pulsing with energy. Its jagged grin seemed to grow wider, and I felt a force pushing me back, as if the pumpkin itself were alive and intent on crushing me. I struggled to resist. Daniel shouted, "The fear. Don't let it feed on you. Fight it. Focus." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to calm the panic twisting my chest. Slowly, the pull lessened. The pumpkin wavered in midair, then dropped to the ground. Harmless for the moment, the carver stopped, head tilting slightly, observing. For the first time, I sensed hesitation, a momentary pause in its perfect, inexorable rhythm. And I realized it could be challenged, but the night was far from over. The town trembled in fear, and we had only just begun to understand the rules of the game. The carver's power was immense, but not absolute. And if we failed, Hollow Creek would not survive another dawn as the moon climbed high, casting silver light over the cursed square. Daniel and I understood the terrifying truth. The pumpkins weren't just predicting death, they were creating it, shaping it, controlling it. And we were trapped inside a nightmare that would not end, unless we could finally outthink the impossible. By the 9th night, Hollow Creek had become a ghost town. Windows were shuttered, doors barred, and the streets were empty except for the glowing pumpkins scattered like traps across the cobblestones. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, broken only by the occasional hollow scream of a pumpkin shattered in the wrong way. Daniel and I had been preparing for this night. We had mapped every pumpkin, memorized their positions, and memorized the patterns we had seen unfold over the previous week. But knowing the pattern wasn't enough. We had to act now before the pumpkin, carved with my face, claimed me completely. The town square was the epicenter of the curse. Pumpkins littered every surface, steps, benches, and even the fountain. Each one glowed faintly, as if breathing, as if alive. And at the center, the carver hovered above a massive pumpkin, shaping it with impossible precision. Its featureless face tilted slightly as it sensed our approach, the hollow air vibrating with its awareness. Daniel whispered, "Masum, it's ready for us. Whatever happens, stay focused. Don't let fear guide you." I nodded, though my hands shook. The pumpkin in front of me pulsed, and I felt the energy of it pressing against my chest, trying to pull me in, trying to claim me. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to focus on the rules we had observed. The carver could enforce fate, but only according to the pumpkins it had carved. Disrupt the pattern, and we could create openings. We moved cautiously, smashing smaller pumpkins along the way. Each destruction caused a hollow scream, echoing through the square, reverberating in our minds. The carver glided closer, shaping new pumpkins instantly to replace the ones we destroyed. Its speed, its precision, were terrifying. But I noticed something. Each new pumpkin it created obeyed the same logic as the others. There was a rule, a structure that we could exploit. I glanced at Daniel. "We need to break the sequence," I said. "Hit the big one in the center. It's controlling the rest." Daniel's eyes widened. "If we fail..." I didn't finish the sentence. There was no need. Failure meant death, not just ours, but potentially everyone left in Hollow Creek. We ran, dodging the pulsing pumpkins, and reached the massive one at the center. Its face was grotesque, jagged, and impossibly detailed. I swung my crowbar, striking the pumpkin with all my strength. The hollow scream it emitted was deafening, a sound that seemed to scrape along the inside of my skull. The carver reacted instantly. Shadows stretched from its featureless form, wrapping around the pumpkins we had damaged, reshaping them in midair. The air vibrated with its power, and I felt myself being pressed to the ground by invisible force. Daniel yelled, "Masom!" Focus on the logic. It follows rules. I nodded, struggling to control my panic. The carver couldn't break its own sequence. It couldn't change what it had already set in motion. I realized that the massive pumpkin was the keystone. If it fell, the other pumpkins might falter long enough for us to escape. I swung again, harder this time. The pumpkin shattered into 1,000 glowing shards. The scream echoed into silence. The remaining pumpkins wavered, glowing less intensely. The shadows receded slightly. The carver paused, tilting its head, assessing, recalculating, and then it vanished. For the first time in 9 nights, the square was silent. The hollow energy that had pressed against our minds lifted slightly. We were alive. But the cost was clear. The carver was patient, and this was only a temporary victory. Daniel exhaled shakily. We bought ourselves time. But it's still out there, and it's learning from us. I nodded, chest heaving, staring at the broken shards of the massive pumpkin. Hollow Creek had survived the night, but we were no closer to understanding why the carver had chosen this town, or what it wanted. And deep down, I knew one terrifying truth. It wasn't done with me, or Daniel, or the town the pumpkins had paused. But they were far from finished. Asterisk, asterisk, by the 10th night, Hollow Creek was unrecognizable. The town's streets were littered with shattered pumpkins, glowing fragments that pulsed faintly even after being broken. Homes were abandoned, doors left wide open, as though the town itself had fled. Daniel and I moved cautiously, the silence pressing against us, broken only by the faint hum of distant pumpkins somewhere deep in the shadows. We had survived previous encounters, disrupted the patterns, shattered the massive pumpkin that controlled them all, but we knew the carver was patient, eternally patient. It didn't need to kill quickly. It only needed time, fear, and obedience. The final confrontation was inevitable. The town square was the stage. The remaining pumpkins glowed ominously, hovering slightly above the ground. And there it was, the carver, larger than ever, surrounded by hundreds of tiny, moving pumpkins. Its featureless face tilted toward us, assessing. Daniel whispered, "This is it. One chance, Masum. One chance to end Etor. We're finished." I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of 9 nights of terror, of deaths, disappearances, and endless fear. I understood now the carver's power. It wasn't just the pumpkins, it was the rules, the logic, the inevitability. Every action had a reaction, every carving a destiny. But rules, no matter how ancient, could be exploited if understood. I motioned to Daniel. We attacked together. Disrupt everything at once. Break the sequence. Force it to recalculate. We moved, crowbars, lanterns, whatever we could carry, smashing pumpkins as we went. Hollow screams filled the night, echoing through the town. Shadows writhed, stretching toward us, but we pushed forward, smashing everything in sight. The carver moved among them, attempting to restore order, but the sheer speed and chaos of our attack slowed it. And then, the final moment came. A massive pumpkin floated above the fountain, larger than any we had seen. Its face was mind-twisted, hollow-eyed, screaming. The date carved into its base was tonight. I felt its pull, its hunger, its intent to claim me. I ran, grabbing a nearby lantern, and hurled it with all my strength. Flames engulfed the pumpkin. Hollow screams erupted, reverberating through my mind, shaking the very ground beneath me. The shards fell, glowing faintly, then dimmed. The carver froze, featureless face tilting in something that felt like frustration. Daniel yelled, "Now! Smash the rest." We did. Pumpkins shattered, fragments scattering across the square. Shadows recoiled, wailing in silence. And for a brief, heart-stopping moment, the carver vanished. Hollow Creek was silent. No glowing pumpkins, no pulsing energy, no looming shadows. Just quiet, chilling, unnatural silence. We staggered, exhausted, and looked around. The town had survived, but it was empty. The festival, the people, the life all gone or changed forever. And deep down, we knew the carver had not been destroyed. It was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting, patient beyond measure. Daniel finally spoke, voice trembling. "Masum, do you think it's gone?" I shook my head slowly. "No, not gone. Just waiting. And it will come back. For Hollow Creek or for another town. We only bought time." The pumpkins had ceased their immediate terror, but the lesson remained. Fear was power. Patience was power. And the carver had both an infinite supply. I looked down at the remnants of my own carved face among the shattered pumpkins. Hollow eyes, jagged grin, frozen scream. And I realized that while we had survived the night, the memory of the pumpkins and the inevitability they represented would haunt us forever. Hollow Creek had escaped the final harvest, but the harvest itself would never end. Somewhere in the shadows of the night, the pumpkin carver waited, patient and eternal. Ready for the next town, the next sequence, the next harvest. And I knew, without doubt, that someday it would return. The night was silent again, too silent. And somewhere deep in the forest, I could swear I heard the faint scraping of a knife, or the carving of another pumpkin, patiently waiting for the next soul. Hollow Creek would never sleep peacefully again. Asterisk, asterisk, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you in the next one. Peace out. By the 9th night, Hollow Creek had become a ghost town. Windows were shuttered, doors barred, and the streets were empty except for the glowing pumpkins scattered like traps across the cobblestones. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, broken only by the occasional hollow scream of a pumpkin shattered in the wrong way. Daniel and I had been preparing for this night. We had mapped every pumpkin, memorized their positions, and memorized the patterns we had seen unfold over the previous week. But knowing the pattern wasn't enough. We had to act Nelby for the pumpkin. Carved with my face claimed me completely. The town square was the epicenter of the curse. Pumpkins littered every surface, steps, benches, and even the fountain. Each one glowed faintly, as if breathing, as if alive. And at the center, the carver hovered above a massive pumpkin, shaping it with impossible precision. Its featureless face tilted slightly as it sensed our approach, the hollow air vibrating with its awareness. Daniel whispered, "Masum, it's ready for us. Whatever happens, stay focused. Don't let fear guide you." I nodded, though my hands shook. The pumpkin in front of me pulsed, and I felt the energy of it pressing against my chest, trying to pull me in, trying to claim me. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to focus on the rules we had observed. The carver could enforce fate, but only according to the pumpkins it had carved. Disrupt the pattern, and we could create openings. We moved cautiously, smashing smaller pumpkins along the way. Each destruction caused a hollow scream, echoing through the square, reverberating in our minds. The carver glided closer, shaping new pumpkins instantly to replace the ones we destroyed. Its speed, its precision were terrifying. But I noticed something. Each new pumpkin it created obeyed the same logic as the others. There was a rule, a structure that we could exploit. I glanced at Daniel. "We need to break the sequence," I said. "Hit the big one in the center. It's controlling the rest." Daniel's eyes widened. "If we fail..." I didn't finish the sentence. There was no need. Failure meant death, not just ours, but potentially everyone left in Hollow Creek. We ran, dodging the pulsing pumpkins, and reached the massive one at the center. Its face was grotesque, jagged, and impossibly detailed. I swung my crowbar, striking the pumpkin with all my strength. The hollow scream it emitted was deafening. It's a sound that seemed to scrape along the inside of my skull. The carver reacted instantly. Shadows stretched from its featureless form, wrapping around the pumpkins we had damaged, reshaping them in mid-air. The air vibrated with its power, and I felt myself being pressed to the ground by invisible force. Daniel yelled, "Masam. Focus on the logic. It follows rules." I nodded, struggling to control my panic. The carver couldn't break its own sequence. It couldn't change what it had already set in motion. I realized that the massive pumpkin was the keystone. If it fell, the other pumpkins might falter long enough for us to escape. I swung again, harder this time. The pumpkin shattered into 1,000 glowing shards. The scream echoed into silence. The remaining pumpkins wavered, glowing less intensely. The shadows receded slightly. The carver paused, tilting its head, assessing, recalculating. And then it vanished. For the first time in 9 nights, the square was silent. The hollow energy that had pressed against our minds lifted slightly. We were alive. But the cost was clear. The carver was patient, and this was only a temporary victory. Daniel exhaled shakily. We bought ourselves time, but it's still out there, and it's learning from us. I nodded, chest heaving, staring at the broken shards of the massive pumpkin. Hollow Creek had survived the night, but we were no closer to understanding why the carver had chosen this town, or what it wanted. And deep down, I knew one terrifying truth. It wasn't done with me, or Daniel, or the town the pumpkins had paused. But they were far from finished. Asterisk, asterisk, by the 10th night, Hollow Creek was unrecognizable. The town streets were littered with shattered pumpkins, glowing fragments that pulsed faintly even after being broken. Homes were abandoned, doors left wide open as though the town itself had fled. Daniel and I moved cautiously, the silence pressing against us, broken only by the faint hum of distant pumpkins somewhere deep in the shadows. We had survived previous encounters, disrupted the patterns, shattered the massive pumpkin that controlled them. All but we knew the carver was patient, eternally patient. It didn't need to kill quickly. It only needed time, fear, and obedience. The final confrontation was inevitable. The town square was the stage. The remaining pumpkins glowed ominously, hovering slightly above the ground. And there it was, the carver, larger than ever, surrounded by hundreds of tiny, moving pumpkins. Its featureless face tilted toward us, assessing. Daniel whispered, "This is it. One chance, Masam. One chance to end a tour. We're finished." I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of 9 nights of terror, of deaths, disappearances, and endless fear. I understood now the carver's power. It wasn't just the pumpkins, it was the rules, the logic, the inevitability. Every action had a reaction. Every carving a destiny. But rules, no matter how ancient, could be exploited if understood. I motioned to Daniel. We attacked together. Disrupt everything at once. Break the sequence. Force it to recalculate. We moved. Crowbars, lanterns, whatever we could carry, smashing pumpkins as we went. Hollow screams filled the night, echoing through the town. Shadows writhed, stretching toward us, but we pushed forward, smashing everything in sight. The carver moved among them, attempting to restore order, but the sheer speed and chaos of our attack slowed it. And then, the final moment came. A massive pumpkin floated above the fountain, larger than any we had seen. Its face was mind-twisted, hollow-eyed, screaming. The date carved into its base was tonight. I felt its pull, its hunger, its intent to claim me. I ran, grabbing a nearby lantern, and hurled it with all my strength. Flames engulfed the pumpkin. Hollow screams erupted, reverberating through my mind, shaking the very ground beneath me. The shards fell, glowing faintly, then dimmed. The carver froze, featureless face tilting in something that felt like frustration. Daniel yelled, "Now, smash the rest." We did. Pumpkins shattered, fragments scattering across the square. Shadows recoiled, wailing in silence. And for a brief, heart-stopping moment, the carver vanished. Hollow Creek was silent. No glowing pumpkins, no pulsing energy, no looming shadows. Just quiet, chilling, unnatural silence. We staggered, exhausted, and looked around. The town had survived, but it was empty. The festival, the people, the life all gone, or changed forever. And deep down, we knew the carver had not been destroyed. It was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. Patient beyond measure, Daniel finally spoke, voice trembling. "Masam, do you think it's gone?" I shook my head slowly. "No, not gone. Just waiting. And it will come back. For Hollow Creek or for another town." We only bought time. The pumpkins had ceased their immediate terror, but the lesson remained. Fear was power. Patience was power. And the carver had both in infinite supply. I looked down at the remnants of my own carved face among the shattered pumpkins. Hollow eyes, jagged grin, frozen scream. And I realized that while we had survived the night, the memory of the pumpkins and the inevitability they represented would haunt us forever. Hollow Creek had escaped the final harvest, but the harvest itself would never end. Somewhere, in the shadows of the night, the pumpkin carver waited, patient and eternal. Ready for the next town, the next sequence, the next harvest. And I knew, without doubt, that someday it would return. The night was silent again. Too silent. And somewhere deep in the forest, I could swear I heard the faint scraping of a knife. Or the carving of another pumpkin. Patiently waiting for the next soul. Hollow Creek would never sleep peacefully again. Asterisk, asterisk. All right, everyone. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. If you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe. Have a great night, and I'll see you next time.